When does the Godhead make a special appearance in the Old Testament? That's been our series in chapel for a week or so, and Charles, the Mustang who's had his overhaul, will try to clean up the mess that the rest of them have made. We've seen, in the Old Testament, we've seen theophanies, or we've seen the angel of the Lord, or we've seen avatars, if you want to go back to Jeopardy. We've seen those appearances several times. And since this is the last sermon in the series, I want to suggest a bit of an overarching reason for why these dynamic, demonstrative appearances occurred as we go along. And this may not be the reason, but I think it's related. These incidents that we have talked about take place at pivotal and extremely important junctures in the development of the Israelite nation and the promises that God made through Abraham. If you think about it, Abraham, the three come to him in Genesis chapter 18, and it has been 30 years since the promise that he will have a child. You think Abraham's thinking, I'm 100 and she's 90. What's happened to the promise? And God shows up and says, in 1 year. Demonstratively, he says, the promise is not broken. I'm still here to make it happen. And then we studied with Jacob in Genesis 32 as he returns to the promised land. Jacob, his sons are supposed to make up the nation of the Abrahamic promise. And where is he? He's over in Padan Aram, but now he's back. And the Lord appears to him, or an angel or whomever, to say, you're back. This is the promised land. This is where the nation will be. This will be the land. It's as if the Lord is saying, promise is still intact. And then Moses, in Exodus chapter 3, is it not time for the Lord in the burning bush to show up and in a demonstrative way say, now is the time. This is the time I'm going to fulfill the nation promise. That's what he did. And then that strange Balaam incident. The Israelites have come out of bondage, but they've wandered around the desert for 38 years or 40 years. Will they get the land or not? And they're headed up the eastern side of the Dead Sea, and Balak and Moabites stand in the way. Will they stop them? Will they destroy the Israelites? Will the land promise be done? Will the nation promise end right there? Or will God fulfill His promise? And He did. Through a donkey and through Balaam, God says, I'm on mission here. And everything's going to take place the way I intended. And then Joshua sees the commander of the army. Yeah, they get in the land, but as our brother said, there's Jericho. Pretty daunting task. Will the Lord be able to overcome the giants in the land like He promised? And the commander of the army shows up and says, now, I'm not just on your side, I'm on the Lord's side. I'm here to make the promise of the land be fulfilled. And then the ones that we didn't get to hear from the book of Judges. When Gideon is told in Judges chapter 6, or his appearance to him is, he thinks, are we going to keep this land? Are we going to be able to conquer this land and keep it like the Lord promised? And the appearance of the Lord, in essence, said, yes. And then to Manoah, the parents of Samson, will the land promise continue? Will the nation promise continue? Will you continue to protect us and bring us back to where we will be faithful again? Is this clicking? Is this making a mess? Are we okay? Okay? It's all right? Okay. I'm hearing things. So I think there's a thread through all those that the Lord shows up in a very dynamic way to say the promises are still intact. But when we get to the time of Daniel, hundreds of years have passed. Things are not going so well for Daniel and his friends in Babylon in the 500s BC. Those Abrahamic promises maybe have faded from view. Are they still the chosen nation as far as God's concerned? And what about our land? What about the seed promise? Will that ever come about? Will that ever come to pass? It looks pretty bleak for the four Israelites, Belteshazzar, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the other Israelites who are still faithful to God, though in Babylonian captivity. Where are the promises now? And maybe more, where's God? Where's God? Yes, Israel and Judah have indeed deserved this. Yes, indeed, God's people have been conquered by Nebuchadnezzar, let's just call him Neb from now on, and been carried away into captivity. And as they leave their homeland for 70 years of captivity, they might be looking over their shoulder at what? A holy city in flames, a temple in rubble, the king's palace destroyed, and the worship articles from the temple in the sack of the Babylonians headed for the temple of their gods, and the dead bodies of many of God's chosen people lying on the ground in the promised land. There is nothing left of the promised land. And will the promised nation survive? And again, what about that promised seed promise who's supposed to bless all nations? How is that going to happen? Where is God? Where is the God who's supposed to be here? The book of Daniel answers that question emphatically. The answer is, He has gone into Babylon with you. He has not abandoned you. He is still with you. In chapter 1, as Daniel faces the cultural pressures, the intrusions into his kosher lifestyle, everything about the pressure to be faithful to what he can be faithful to, and God in His providence works that out. But He does not appear personally in chapter 1. Chapter 2, there is that dynamic dream that Nebuchadnezzar has that actually threatens the life of Daniel if he can't tell the interpretation. And so God shows up, in a way, in a dream, in a vision, and tells him what it means. But though He gives him an interpretation, He does not show up in a personal appearance. For chapter 3, He shows up in a very personal way. He delivers them. In the threat of annihilation, He delivers and He appears. You know the story well, I'm sure. Nebuchadnezzar's arrogance and narcissism have reached heretical and catastrophic proportions in this incident. In cahoots with his satraps and prefects. Don't you just like to say that? Satraps and prefects. I don't know what that is, but we don't use those words. Satraps and prefects and he have gotten together and decided to build this monstrosity, this idol, as it were, of gold, 90 feet high by 9 feet wide. And everybody's supposed to worship this God. Actually, I think it's probably more about him than the God myself. And he puts it where everybody can see and when everybody would bow down. And when he put this special band together, I'm going to call it the Babylonian Boppers. I don't know what the name of it was. But at the designated anthem to this idol, all will bow down. All will fall down. All will serve this God. All will worship the image, or you will be burned alive. Verse 6. Where is God now? How can He do anything now? When the faithful need Him most, where is He? The three Israelites have even lost their Jewish names. Now they are from Baal, name of the chief god. How'd you like to have that name? Shadrach. These are difficult to translate, by the way. I am fearful of a god. Meshach, I am despised before my God. Abednego, servant of Nebo. It's almost like they've been given names to take away their old identity, but there is some shame here, it seems to me. There is some humiliation given to them. You no longer serve God, Jehovah God. He is not a God. Our gods are the gods, and you will follow them. It's a shame to me that our familiarity is more with those names than their real meaning names. Daniel, my judge is God. Hananiah, gracious is Jehovah. Mishael, who is he that is God? Azariah, Jehovah hath helped. And so maybe we could say, even though their names have been taken away and given names that are heretical, they have not taken away these men's faithfulness. No matter what the threat, they will not succumb to the peer pressure or the tyrannical threat that faces them. When given one more chance, remember, Nebuchadnezzar gives them one more chance. They say, we will not bow down. Kevin?
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve will be able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up.
So even if God doesn't show up, they hope that he will, but they don't know that he will. But whether he will show up or not, they say, we will not recant our belief in Jehovah. We will not adopt your idolatrous worship to save our lives. Well, knowing Nebuchadnezzar like we do, you know he said something like this, well, that's okay, guys, fellas. I hadn't really thought of how this might offend your God, and so you don't really have to bow down. No, he was furious, wasn't he? How dare these foreigners, these slaves, defy the greatest king on earth? Heat it up, boys. 7 times hotter for these rebels, these dirt bags. I don't even care if it kills some of my mightiest men who throw them in. No one defies the great king Nebuchadnezzar. And so indeed, the text says, they fall into the fire. Verse 23. Kevin?
Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire? They replied, certainly, O king. He said, look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods.
Later, Nebuchadnezzar will conclude in verse 28 that Jehovah God has sent his angel and rescued his servants. Now, I think what's important here to understand that Nebuchadnezzar is the one who said both of these things. He's the one who said, that looks like a son of the gods. He's the one who said Jehovah God has sent his angel to deliver them. That's Nebuchadnezzar's take. We don't know if he's inspired in saying that or not. We don't even know if that's the exact truth of what's actually happening here. So you have to be careful in that who's speaking, and are they really inspired, or did God use them to say something? He certainly did that. We can be sure of that. But to say specifically here as to who this is, I'm not sure I can do that. Whether it's Jesus, whether it's the angel of the Lord, or whether it's an angel of God's heavens sent to deliver these men from the fire, I don't know that specifically. But I think I do know that when Israel really needs God to show up in a dynamic, demonstrative way, he does. Even if they are in captivity, and even if most of the Jews are apostate, he comes this time more than in silent providence, chapter 1. More than in a sleepy dream, chapter 2. No, he shows up to save his people, to say, I'm here, I'm with you, never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. I am here to keep my covenant. Is this not about God preserving the Abrahamic covenant with his people? So Nebuchadnezzar calls them out. And now Nebuchadnezzar responds in verse 28. Kevin?
Then Nebuchadnezzar said, Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way.
Now, he's going to get a personal dose of humility and discipline in chapter 4. Nebuchadnezzar does. But at least at this point, and don't misunderstand here, he's not saying, oh, Jehovah God's the only God. That's not what he's saying. But he is willing at this point to add Jehovah God to the pantheon of gods that he believes in. So, where is God? Where is God? He shows up to say, I am right here among you. Even though I've had to send you into captivity, even though I've had to punish you. Oh, and by the way, that was part of his promise of the covenant of blessing and cursing, wasn't it? I mean, he had to do that. But that he did that didn't say, I've abandoned you forever. I'm going to break my promise. I'm going to abandon my promises. Indeed, he did not. When you and I are asking, where is God? Perhaps from time to time we do. Or maybe there are a few junctures in our lives where our spiritual frailty is such that we're asking, where is God? When our times of trial come, in our desperate times when our faith is challenged, sometimes we ask, where is He? And His answer is still, I am with you. You recognize the Haggai passage? The people have come home to rubble. They get to come home. And it's time to build this temple again. They've been intimidated by the peoples round about them. And the Lord, through the prophet Haggai, says 3 times. Twice He will actually say, I am with you. I am with you. The third time He says, my Spirit's with you. He has to encourage them by saying, I have not left you alone. And then you recognize, of course, Matthew 28:20. You're going into an intimidating world. Lots of culture, lots of enemies, lots of difficulties out there. And the Lord says, I am with you when we go. Never will I leave you. Never will I forsake you. What can man do to you? What can man do to you? So the promises to us is the same as the promise to them. God is right here. He has answered the question of where is God. He's saying, I'm still here. I'm right here. But now He has a question for us that's posed in the book as well. I want you to notice the text here, and I know this is way too many words on the screen, but I red-lettered it for a reason. I'm sure you've recognized that in reading Daniel chapter 3, that there is this repetition, there is this literary device that the writer uses to repeat something over and over and over. I think it's almost 10 or 11 times in the book that there is this repetition. When the music sounds, you must fall down and worship the image. And if you don't fall down and worship the image, and that's repeated over and over and over again throughout the book, throughout the chapter. So the question is to the Israelites, whom will you worship? It's posed to the 3, but really the question is to the nation that has gone apostate and has been sent into captivity. And the question is not just to the faithful who are asking, wow, we can't get back to our temple. We can't worship the way we want to. But their response, the 3 are responding, we will worship God. Read 16 and 18 again, brother.
Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. We're thrown into the blazing furnace. The God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your God or worship the image of gold you have set up.
We're in slavery. We're not able to worship Jehovah the way we want to or the way we're even supposed to. We're inundated by cultural pressure and by government threat, away from family, friends, and all that's familiar to us. But we will worship Jehovah only, regardless of whether He shows up or not in person. Whether we die or not, we have made the decision to worship the Lord our God and to serve Him only. So the question comes to us, whom will we worship? Our culture may not be as threatening at this point, but maybe it will get as threatening. I don't know. But the question comes to you and me, when the culture presses in, will you fear and will you fall down to postmodernism or whatever other ism threatens us? Or will you worship the Lord our God and serve Him only? When the political climate becomes hostile to your faith, will you cave to that pressure and will you give in? Will you be quiet or will you succumb? Or will you stand up and worship the Lord our God only? When the economics look bleak, will you blame God for not providing for you and not worship Him further? When your mission team comes apart, will you ask, "What happened, God? We believe that you would sustain us no matter what." When, God forbid, your spouse takes another lover, will you spurn the one before whom you took your vows to be faithful to him as well as to your mate? When the church fires you, will you reject his bride because you weren't treated fairly? When the actual threat of a gunman comes through the door to shoot you, will you say what Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego said? No matter what, whether the Lord shows up or not to deliver us, we will serve and worship Jehovah God only. I know some that have caved in. I'm sure you do. I know some that no longer serve the Lord, even graduates of this wonderful school. So what will your answer be for the rest of your life? What will your answer be? Be thou faithful unto death, and I'll give you the crown of life. Will you be able to say at the end of time, I have fought the good fight, I have finished the course, I have kept the faith. Henceforth there is laid up for me a crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, has given to me on that day, not only to me, but also to all those who have loved His appearing. And the Lord will say, well done, thou good and faithful servant. Enter into the joy of the Lord. Whom will you worship till Jesus comes?